Hello, welcome to another episode of Finding America. America, a country that I moved to now just over 10 years ago in 2008 from England. And anybody that watches this channel on a frequent basis will know of my love for trains and specifically having grown up in England for high-speed rail trains. Now, I don't remember when it was, probably about 2010, I took a train from Indianapolis to Chicago. Now, that's roughly the distance between London and Grimsby, Grimsby being my hometown in the UK. So I often took a train, actually two trains, because you have to change, from London to Grimsby. And the actual time that it takes to do that is, roughly speaking, about 3 hours, if you include that change in there as well. It's just over 4 hours to do Chicago to Indianapolis, and there's no change. And so when I first took this train, and it was ambling along and occasionally stopping for goodness knows what reason, I just thought it was having a bad day. I didn't think anything more of it than that. I thought, well, obviously there's something wrong with the tracks. They're just having to move slowly. This can't possibly be the norm. But when I found out that actually this is the norm, this is exactly how much time it takes, I was kind of taken aback. And so whenever anybody asks me what I miss most about living in the UK, my answer is always the same: high-speed rail. As you can see from this map, high-speed rail is fairly comprehensive throughout the United Kingdom. The yellow indicates tracks upon which trains run at 201 kilometers per hour. That is considered high-speed rail. And you've also got that track there, you'll notice in red, that goes from London to France. That's the Eurostar, and that can get up to speeds of 299 kilometers per hour. So throughout the country, particularly England itself, you do have quite a comprehensive high-speed rail network. Moreover, people use it frequently. In 2017, 80.2 billion kilometers were travelled by all passengers throughout that entire year. Now let's compare that total to the United States, which we must remember is a much bigger place, has way more people than the United Kingdom. But in that very same year of 2017, only 10.6 billion passenger kilometres were racked up. So right off the bat, you've got considerably fewer people using trains in general in the United States than you do in the United Kingdom. That's not even per capita, that's just hard real numbers. And, you know, we took a look a moment ago at the high-speed rail throughout the United Kingdom. Well, here's a look at it in the United States. To say that it doesn't have high-speed rail is not entirely true. You can see here on the East Coast some amount of high-speed rail that runs from DC to Boston. It's intermittent throughout that particular line, that line being the Acela Express. And sometimes on that line, speeds will reach 240 kilometers per hour. But that is an outlier in this country. For the most part, as you can see from the remainder of this map, not only do these tracks not cover the entirety of the United States, but those grey lines that make the majority of these passenger rail lines only reach speeds of 177 kilometers per hour or less. Mostly from experience, much less. You will find yourself on these trains ambling along at much slower speeds than I just listed. Now, even if they were to reach those top speeds of 177 kilometers per hour, that would not be considered high-speed rail by the very definition of high-speed rail. Now, there's one huge contributing factor as to why these Amtrak trains, these trains owned by Amtrak, don't reach their top speeds of that 177 kilometers per hour, and that's because the tracks that Amtrak utilizes are not owned by Amtrak. They're owned by freight companies. There are 8 major freight companies in the United States, and the amount of tracks that those freight companies use is actually far more expansive than the map that I just showed you for passenger rail only. In fact, this map, which looks more like the human circulatory system, paints the picture of just how dominant freight trains are in the United States. According to the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, there are more than 93,000 miles of freight train track in the United States. And like I said, that map that I showed you before with all of the Amtrak routes, those tracks are owned by the freight companies. So Amtrak actually has to prioritize the routes of these freight trains before it can move its trains along. So often you will find yourself on a train that gets stuck on tracks for over an hour while another freight train is trying to move through. And you just sit there and have to wait for that to finish. It's no joke. The United States is the 3rd highest freight transporter in the entire world and employs within its industry over 100 150,000 people. Compare that to Amtrak, which employs just over 20,000. Now, that's just why Amtrak can't reach its top speed of 177 kilometers an hour, never mind high-speed rail. So why then, if the rest of the developed world has implemented some kind of high-speed rail service of its own, has the United States not really kept up? Well, here's a couple of theories. So firstly, the United States is already rather big on its car culture. Don't believe me, just need to look at the numbers here. 833 people per every 1,000 residents owns a car. Compare that to the United Kingdom, where it's just 469 people per every 1,000 owns a car. You could break this down by state a little more. 4 states where this number is highest, they're all out west. It's North Dakota, Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. In Wyoming, over 1,100 people own a car per every 1,000 residents, suggesting that some people have more than one car. But even on the lowest end of the scale, in the state of New York, it's 539 people per every 1,000 own a vehicle. That's still higher than the United Kingdom's entire average. And so indeed, car culture is a big thing in the United States. And of course, when the question comes up about adding a track here or adding a track there for passengers, you'll often see lobbying by the automobile industry to vote that down. They want to keep in place this car culture so that they can shift a car or two or 2,000. And just anecdotally, over the years, I've spoken to Americans about the idea of high-speed rail and what it could mean for the United States, and many of them do come back with, well, you know, I just prefer to drive. And that's fair enough. You know, I can't put my preferences on other people. I mean, I could suggest that, you know, where you're given the chance or the exposure to it, that you might well come around, as I did early on in my life and have maintained this love of high-speed rail. But even if it was, there's something really, really crucial that you have to take into consideration when you're talking about the United States and nationwide high-speed rail, and that's population density. So why do we talk about population density when we're talking about high-speed rail? Well, you've got to have a demand, firstly, for high-speed rail. No good coming up with all these plans to have high-speed rail from one place to another, and that other place having a very low population density, because very few people are going to utilize it. And the United States, unfortunately, would run into that problem. The country, just as a whole, has a population density of about 87 people per every square mile. Compare that to the United Kingdom, where it's about 704 people per square mile. So that's just a national comparison. But remember those 4 states that I mentioned a moment ago that are very high on car ownership: Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota, and Idaho. It just happens that those 4 states are some of the least densely populated states in the nation. So Idaho has 20 people per square mile, North Dakota 10 people per square mile, Montana 7, and Wyoming 6 people per square mile. If you wanted to see this visually, take a look at this map. This is a map of what the states would look like if they were representative of the number of people in them. So straight away you're running into a big problem there. If you wanted a very comprehensive nationwide high-speed rail system that included all of these states, it would be very hard to justify from an economic standpoint. Now you might think, why can't you have tracks that run through those states but connect, you know, densely populated areas to one another? Well, the problem is that a lot of densely populated areas in the United States can often be thousands of miles away from each other. But that would be the point, right? To get people from one place to another more quickly. Well, once you start exceeding a certain distance, at that point, high-speed rail comes into competition with one already existing mode of transport, and that's planes. Take, for example, my home city, my current city, I should say, of Chicago. If you wanted to travel from Chicago to San Francisco, about 2,200 miles, you can do that on a flight. I did do it last year. It takes about 4.5 hours by plane. Remember, that's about the same time frame as Indianapolis to Chicago by Amtrak. Whereas if you had a high-speed train of the ilk that I showed you in the United Kingdom, it would take between 8 and 10 hours to get there. So comparatively, it's more worth it for the consumer to take a plane. You know, the only way that they could incentivize you in that instance is to lower the cost compared to plane travel. Now, you may remember in the news there was this story about the Hyperloop in California. It would have connected Los Angeles to California. It's been scrapped. A multi-billion-dollar project was scrapped by the state earlier this year. Now, when this was first conceived, they were talking about speeds of 1,200 kilometers per hour. Now, if you could have that kind of thing nationwide, sure, you could do Chicago to San Francisco faster than you'd be able to do by plane, but think of the implementation cost of doing so. If they were just trying to do this in California from LA to San Francisco, imagine this nationwide. We'd be talking trillions of dollars. I'm an optimist. You know, I'd love to see a future where we really do have Hyperloop type speeds across the nation. But for the reasons that I laid out in this video, I don't think that's going to happen for a very long time. You may see an extension of Hyperloop ideas, or at least high-speed rail ideas, on the coasts, and specifically up there in the northeast coast, because look how densely populated it is. There could be quite a demand for that if ever they want to increase the speeds of some of the tracks around there. But from a nationwide standpoint, I'd be very surprised if it ever occurred in my lifetime. Thank you for watching this episode of Lost in the Pond. Don't forget to hit my stupid little face to subscribe, and please share this video with the world. Hit me up on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, and if you would like to support this channel, please do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond.